This is not merely a story of the past. It is a record of consequence. And this is the story of St. Patrick. He returned to the land that had broken him, not in chains, not as cargo, but by choice. The hills that had once echoed with his loneliness would soon whisper his name with reverence. Fires that once burned in defiance would bow to a different flame. The boy who had trembled in the cold of captivity would stand before kings and speak of eternity. Ireland would never be the same again. Yet when he first set foot upon that distant shore, he was not a saint. He was not even a priest. He was a frightened youth, torn from comfort and cast into exile by men who saw in him nothing but profit. His transformation was neither swift nor certain. It was forged in isolation, hardened by hunger, shaped by fear. To understand the power he would come to wield, one must return to the moment before his name carried weight, before destiny seemed inevitable, before faith became his weapon and shield. We return now to a boy standing at the edge of empire, unaware that his suffering would one day reshape a nation. He was born in the late 4th century, around the year 387 AD, in Roman Britain. The precise place remains debated among historians, though Patrick himself named his birthplace Banavem Tabernii, a Roman settlement whose exact location is lost to time. Many scholars place it somewhere along the western coast of Britain, possibly in modern Wales, Cumbria, or southwestern Scotland. His name at birth was Maewyn Succat. His family lived within the fading framework of Roman authority. Britain was still formally part of the empire, but the imperial presence was weakening. Legions had begun withdrawing. Order remained, but certainty was eroding. Patrick's father, Calpurnius, was both a Christian deacon and a minor Roman official, a decurion responsible for local administration. His grandfather, Petitus, had served as a priest. Faith existed in the household, but Patrick would later admit that in youth he paid little attention to it. Beyond the narrow sea lay Ireland, an island Rome had never conquered. It was a land of tribal kingdoms and shifting alliances. Power rested with warrior chieftains who ruled clans bound by blood and loyalty. Spiritual authority belonged to the Druids, scholars and ritual leaders who preserved law, tradition, and the sacred rites of the people. In the year 401, when Patrick was about 16 years old, the fragile security of his world shattered. Irish raiders struck the coast of Roman Britain. These were not imperial armies seeking territory. They were slave raiders seeking bodies. Captives could be sold or forced into labor across the sea. Patrick was taken with thousands of others. The raiders were believed to be followers of an Irish warlord known as Niall of the Nine Hostages, the powerful High King whose influence extended across Northern Ireland and parts of Western Britain. Under his authority, raids along the British coast were frequent. Bound and transported across the Irish Sea, Patrick was delivered into slavery. He was sold in the northern kingdom of Dalriada, a Gaelic realm that stretched across what is now northeastern Ireland and western Scotland. There, he was sent inland to herd sheep on the harsh slopes of Slemish Mountain, in what is now County Antrim. The transformation was immediate and brutal. Once the son of a Roman household, he now lived alone in the open hills. His master's name is not recorded, but Patrick later wrote that he served as a shepherd, guarding flocks through snow, rain, and bitter wind. Isolation became his world. In his own writings, particularly the Confessio, Patrick recalled that he prayed constantly during those years. He wrote that he would pray 100 times a day, and nearly as often at night, even in freezing rain. Captivity stripped him of status, language, and security. Yet it forged something else: faith. 6 years passed in the cold silence of those hills. Then came the dream. Patrick later wrote that a voice told him his ship was ready, that he would soon return home. Whether divine revelation or desperate hope, the message became command. Around the year 407, he escaped. Leaving Slemish under cover of darkness, he began a desperate journey south toward the coast. According to his own account, he walked nearly 200 miles across unfamiliar territory, through lands controlled by clans who would have returned him to slavery if discovered. Days passed, then weeks. At last he reached a port, likely somewhere along the southern Irish coast, possibly near modern Wexford. There he found a ship preparing to sail for Britain. The sailors were hesitant. A runaway slave was a liability. But eventually they allowed him aboard. Patrick later suggested that persuasion, and perhaps prayer, changed their minds. The sea that had carried him into captivity now carried him home. When he returned to Britain, he found his family alive. They welcomed him with relief and urged him never to leave again. But Ireland had already taken hold of his destiny. Years later, Patrick experienced another vision. He described a figure known as Victoricius arriving with countless letters from Ireland. One message seemed to speak directly to him. "We beg you, holy youth, to come and walk among us once more." The voices of his former captors had become the call of his mission. Patrick left home again. He travelled to Gaul, modern France, to study Christianity more deeply. There he trained under influential church leaders, most notably St. Germanus of Auxerre, a respected bishop known for defending orthodox Christian doctrine. His education was imperfect. Patrick himself admitted that he lacked the polished Latin of other clerics. Yet his resolve was unshaken. Around the year 432, Patrick was sent back to Ireland as a missionary bishop. The island he returned to was still a mosaic of rival kingdoms. Among the most powerful dynasties were the Enil, descendants of Neil of the 9 Hostages, who dominated much of the North and Midlands. Patrick began carefully. He preached first among smaller clans, baptizing converts and establishing Christian communities. Each conversion carried political weight. A baptized chieftain could influence an entire tribe. Yet resistance was inevitable. One of Patrick's most famous confrontations occurred at the royal seat of Tara, the ceremonial capital of the High Kings of Ireland. At the time, Tara was ruled by King Leary MacNeil, son of Neil of the 9 Hostages, and ruler of the powerful Enil dynasty. Nearby stood the Hill of Slain, where Patrick is said to have lit a paschal fire during the festival of Beltane, a sacred celebration overseen by Druids. Tradition held that no fire could be lit before the king's ceremonial flame at Tara. Patrick defied that rule. From Tara, the Druids and the king saw his fire burning across the dark hills. He was summoned before the royal court. There, according to later accounts, Patrick debated Druids and court scholars, defending the Christian faith before the assembled nobles. One Druid, often associated with this tradition, was Lucitmail, though the historical record remains uncertain. King Leary did not convert, but he allowed Patrick to continue preaching. That tolerance changed everything. Patrick moved through territories such as Ulster, Connaught, and parts of Munster, converting local rulers and establishing early churches. Among the regions he influenced were the lands of the Ula in eastern Ulster and the clans of Western Ireland. Over time, monasteries and Christian communities spread across the island. Patrick's mission lasted decades. By the mid-5th century, Christianity had taken root in Ireland, not through conquest, but through gradual alliance with local leaders. In his later years, Patrick wrote his Confessio, a spiritual autobiography defending his mission against critics who questioned his background and education. He described himself humbly as a sinner, chosen for a task beyond his merit. At last, sometime around the year 461, Patrick's long journey came to an end. He died in Saul, in what is now County Down, the very place where he had established one of his earliest churches after returning to Ireland. Tradition holds that he was buried nearby at Downpatrick, where a gravesite long associated with him still stands. The boy who had arrived in chains had become one of the most influential figures in Ireland's history. The world he first encountered as a prisoner did not vanish. Its traditions endured, its people adapted. But the balance had shifted. The authority of the Druids slowly faded. Christian monasteries became centers of learning and spiritual life. Ireland, once outside the orbit of Rome, would soon produce scholars and missionaries who carried learning across Europe during the centuries that followed. Patrick had not conquered the island. He had changed its direction. His life stands as a testament to a quiet paradox of history, that the powerless may endure long enough to reshape the world that once enslaved them. Empires command obedience through strength. Faith commands through conviction. And sometimes, the most enduring revolutions begin not with armies, but with a single survivor who chooses to return. Time erodes all things. Cities crumble, banners fall, names fade into parchment and dust. But the record remains, and so long as it is remembered, it is never truly lost. Until the next chronicle. Subscribe if you wish to witness the next story.